Now we're on. Good morning. Thank you for being here. It's my great pleasure to have you here and be with you today, and those of you online also. Um, okay, so I'm going to recap yesterday and then introduce you to today. But do we have any questions? Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me about anything pertaining to this course? Not so far. Please feel free to do that throughout our sessions together. Don't hold your questions till the end. If you have a question about something that I'm bringing up or just pops into your mind, please don't hold it because I think it's important to address it right away. And I like to interact very much, as you have seen from yesterday if you were here. So I think that's important to help our learning together. Okay, so yesterday, we were introduced to the whole course in topics, and just to recap, the first part of the course is about human rights, and the second part of the course is about peace education, and they are very highly related, and in some places they're taught simultaneously together. But this course was laid out for us for this grant, and so I'm following the layout that you were given, and I was given by the Gian, or Guyan, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, grant. So anyway, we were introduced yesterday to the foundations of modern human rights, the concepts. You had a lot of ideas in our brainstorm. I hope you had a chance to go back and finish that if you would. If you haven't already, if you would, it would help you facilitate that type of activity later because you'd see how it completes. But we had a brainstorm, and I saw that you already have a lot of ideas and concepts about human rights. You've probably had quite a bit of education on this already and personal experience. And yes, we brought up our personal experiences, and we thought about them in our lives, in our curriculum, and the community. We didn't go out to the world so much, but we talked a little bit about that. And I tried to give you some examples of how these concepts are being enacted currently by different groups, particularly by indigenous groups in Africa and in North America. Those are not the only places those were just examples I found that I thought I could show you online. And if you would like, I will share the PowerPoint with you because I was not able to display all of it yesterday. So if you would like to do that, I will make it available. I have also brought a couple of my books from the last few years, and I'm going to share from one of them today, the one about arts and peace education here on your left. And the other one, the conference that I presented in, was it a couple weeks ago or last month, your international conference you had about comprehensive citizenship, that book and those ideas are there if you would like to peruse that. I'm leaving these books here for the university, so they will be here for you to use. I don't know if they're going to put them in the education department or in the library, but they're here for you to use if you would like. So we talked about the foundations of human rights as far as them coming from all different cultures of the world and the concepts of humanism, of fairness, of empowerment of people, even though they're ruled by authorities and monarchs, and what seems fair, what seems right, what portends to our well-being. And so that's what we reviewed and talked about. And then we thought about some examples in our communities and lives, as I said earlier. And I'm trying to make this course very relevant to not only your life, but also your profession, which I think most of you are going to work in the field of education. Whatever branch, you will have curriculum. I defined that yesterday to you as formal, which you learn and do in school at any level, and also informal, what you enact and do in your life. Good morning. Would you like to come up and talk? Okay. And so, so when I'm talking about curriculum here, I mean both. So when I ask you to think about your curriculum and to reflect on that and write on in the activities I give you, I want you to think about both. If you're not formally a teacher right now, you're informally a teacher, an educator, especially if you're a scholar and you're writing, because people are learning through your scholarship. and you're learning with the others that you're interacting with over that scholarship. So that's the curriculum. There's also, I won't go into any deeper detail on curriculum right now, it's not appropriate. So, okay, so I want to move forward today in talking about conflict and how conflict has been analyzed quite a bit in the last century, the major theories of conflict analysis, and how then we apply that in our lives and in our curriculum and in international relations and national relations. So we're going to go through that. I have a couple of PowerPoints to share with you, and I would like you to interact with me and each other during these PowerPoints as we try to apply these theories. And they may not be new to you because I haven't seen what you're studying, but even if they're not, I hope you will engage. And then we're going to move on in the second PowerPoint to talk about breaches and gaps in the application of human rights. So those are the goals today, and then of course I will have you use your reflective journal, continue writing. You might want to write in the same thing that you wrote yesterday, or you can write in something else. And I have one activity to distribute to you. Dr. Mishra, I think you will have something printed for us later that we can use in the second PowerPoint. Okay, so that's it. So now, do you have any questions one more time? May I answer any questions before we continue? Okay, all right. So we're going to start with conflicts in human rights. And I think the whole topic of human rights really has always existed because of conflict. If there wasn't conflict, if there wasn't some kind of need, then we wouldn't even have to discuss rights. But there's always been some kind of need because people not everybody has their needs fulfilled. And conflict is natural, it's omnipresent, it's everywhere, it exists all the time. It's not to be feared. Conflict is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look at a situation and say, oh, okay, I need to pay more attention to this, or we need to pay more attention to this. And if we do pay attention to it and we analyze needs and identify needs and then creatively fulfill needs, everybody's needs, then we have no reason for violence. It's when we don't fulfill needs of everybody in the conflict that things can escalate quite a bit. And as we're seeing in situations nationally here and internationally, I don't know about the community, but it breaks into violence. If needs are unmet, people get so stressed that they get desperate. And safety doesn't matter anymore because they're desperate. So we don't want it to get that far. And so human rights is about basically meeting needs through conflict and avoiding that conflict in the first place if we take care of everybody. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is give you an overview of it and some theory behind it. So Johan Galtung, he's still alive down here. How many of you have heard of Johan Galtung? Norwegian man. No? Okay, well good, I'm not wasting your time here. So Johan Galtung was a graduate student, math major in his country, and he wanted to learn more about conflict and peace and violence, but he wasn't given the opportunity to do that in the university as a graduate student. No, there's no major in that, there's no reason to study that. And so he had to leave his country and go to another country where they said, okay, let's study this. And by the way, I went through this same experience, but I didn't have to go to another country. I was stopped from, in the beginning, from studying conflict and violence in education. Oh, no, there's no problem here. There's no reason for you to study that and write a dissertation about that. So I really had to work a lot and change my situation and find where I could get that done. And now I'm so glad there are programs where you can do this. So Johan was one of the first people. Johan is in his upper 90s now, so it's really wonderful that he's still alive. He's still directing conflict and peace programs. He works internationally in helping disputants between states, between countries, solve their conflicts. And he writes books about it. He's written several, actually. So I'm using his theories here. So conflict, as I said earlier, evidences unmet needs. I'm reading off the PowerPoint here. It indicates an opportunity for addressing the needs. The response requires analysis of the needs, causes, and initiative to meet the evident needs. Conflict can be characterized by direct and indirect violence. Verbal and physical aggression are direct violence, where indirect violence occurs through interactions that may be perceived as not harmful. So I would say that in schools, most of our conflict has indirect violence. There's a lot of indirect violence in the curriculum, in the written curriculum, and I'm going to have you analyze a little bit of that later. And in the setting, how the schools are set up, what kind of interactions are these set up to be? So when we have a setup where people can't meet their needs because the way things are laid out and the expectations for their behaviors, if they can't change that, then that is a form of violence. It's hurting them if their needs are not met. And they may drop out of school. They may not get the same education. So direct and indirect violence, and a lot, again, of what we're talking about in life is indirect violence. So these are some categories, and structural conflict, which is very present in education, is a systemic and ongoing problem. It's very present. It's very present in the curriculum. Who is included in the curriculum, and how are they framed? So I could have come in here and said, you know, this guy, Johan Galtung, this Norwegian guy, he's such a troublemaker because he comes in and he gives students ideas about, you know, you need to look at how the school's setting you up here, and you need to look at how the educators, the teachers, the professors are interacting with you, and you need to look at the curriculum and see, you know, how things are presented and whose story is told and whose story is not told. And all these things that are part of analysis. He could be framed as a big troublemaker, but I'm not, because I think his ideas are very, very useful for talking about education as well as human rights. So structural conflict. So let me see. Some examples. So who gets to school here? Does everybody get to school from every identity group in this community? Everybody gets to school. Everybody can get in school. I know they have the legal right, but do they get into school? Or do some of the children have to go to work? Or they don't have transportation? Or they can't, I don't know, or does the government provide the uniforms here? Or do the families have to provide the uniforms? I know where my children are from, I have adopted children, and I took them out of an orphanage in Peru. They couldn't go to school because, like most children there, because they couldn't afford uniforms and pencil and paper. And so if you don't have the money for pencil and paper and uniforms, and you can't get transportation to get to the school, you just don't get an education. You're illiterate. And so that's structural conflict. What is the structure of education that enables some people to be able to have access just to even get in? And then, of course, another one is once you get in, who's represented in the curriculum, as I said earlier? Is everybody equally represented? Do the students of different identities see themselves, see her history in the curriculum? Is their perspective represented in the curriculum? If not, it's not inclusive, and that's a structural problem, because that's a message that they're not important, that they don't really have as much power in society, they don't have a place of power anyway. So these are examples of structural conflict that can turn into violence. Okay, another one category is cultural, thinking that causes structural conflicts. So cultural conflict is what happens in your mind. It's that justification that says, well, you know, they don't really need to be in school. Like my children are very, very melanated. They're very dark. Their skin is very dark. And in the society where they lived, they were expected to be street cleaners. They were very lucky they got into the orphanage. They were the only dark-skinned children who made it into the orphanage. And people were so surprised they got in. Because why do you need to put street cleaners in an orphanage? Their job is to clean the streets. And they were selling candy on the street when they could get it. Very proud of them for not stealing, as they saw a lot of adults doing who were desperate. And so where did they belong in society? And then when we got into school, we're like, what are you doing here? You're not represented here. And I brought them up to the USA, and they got into history classes in the USA. There was nothing about the incredible histories of South America, where they're from. There was nothing. It was all about Egypt and ancient civilizations over there. Well, they have the same thing, and right where these children were from. They have incredibly advanced ancient civilizations, pyramids, the same thing, and some more advancement than Egypt. A wonderful postal system long before it existed anywhere else in the world. And so, but it's not to be mentioned. It's not in the curriculum. It's not important. So these are just examples. So the teacher justifies this in their mind because these are the printed books that were given to us. These are the printed books, so this is what we need to teach. And we don't need to teach anything else. We don't need to find out about these kids or from somewhere else and teach them anything about their history or find a way to put it in the curriculum. That's not needed. The government didn't say we need it, so we don't need to put it in there. So that hidden message, of course, tells them that, well, we don't fit here, we're not important, I'll just be quiet about my incredible history and what I know and what you can see if you come from my area of the world in Peru. Cultural, of course, gender is another one. The lower expectations for females and students who don't have full access to the language of instruction. Quite often the instructors at all levels, university down to early childhood education, have lower expectations. We have tracking in schools, at least where I live, and I think many other areas of the world too, where the young children are given a literacy test. All right, how much can you read? How well can you read? Oh, you can read at this level. So you go in this group, and you read at this level, so you go in the low group, and they get in a track that they almost can never get out of. Once they get in that lower track group of being a slower reader, we call it the prison pipeline. We see more of those children from that low reading group in prison, females and males both, than any other group. Their literacy when they start school is directly related to what happens to them in their life. And this is cultural because we have lower expectations for children. Well, why should that be? Just because they don't have the opportunity in their homes before they come to school or anywhere else to become more literate, we think of them as culturally less capable. And quite often this maps on to identities or economic level. Okay, so cultural is in the thinking, and in that thinking we create instruction, we create curriculum, we create opportunity to even get to school. Interpersonal, in my research and the research of many other people, interpersonal conflict is the one that most students will think about. When you say, okay, describe conflict to me. Oh, it's about how these people interact with each other and solve a problem. That's the most prevalent in people's minds. And I find that very sad because they're thinking about each other, and this is where enmity, E-M-N-I-T-Y, if you don't know the word enmity, seeing each other as a possible enemy, the other. They're not me, they're the other. Okay, enmity. That occurs because people look at each other as you're not like me, you're different from me, and so we have this problem. Not, oh, there's this whole structural system set up that makes us think that way, like the curriculum in the schools or the way we're represented out in society. They think it's each other, and so they fight with each other, you know, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's not about them. It's the whole structure of what's set up in society that makes people think and feel that way. The way they're separated, the way they're presented to each other, the way some are celebrated and some are not, the competition for resources. Anyway, so interpersonal is social interaction that cause or do not meet needs. So again, a lot of my research, particularly in schools with children and youth, young adults, they always think conflict is about how they get along with each other, and that's it. Okay, and then the one that most researchers and peace activists, including Gandhi, is intrapersonal. What goes on in your mind, and how do you use that? And he was a very good role model for that, particularly in his later life. I work with Buddhists quite a bit, and they're all about that. And I didn't bring the book today. The one that's just coming out this week is, I have an author from a Buddhist university. She's the dean there. And that's what they teach to all the students, particularly all the graduate students. How do you work with your own mind in education? So interpersonal is your self-work and your interactions with yourself. How do you control that voice in your head that says, oh, that person or that situation? How do you shut off the negative voice? Do you even know you have one? And how do you shut it off? Or how do you rephrase in your mind so that you're not letting it express itself? People who experience cultural violence have a very big problem with that because they end up self-blaming. They blame other people and they blame themselves. Oh, it's because I look like this, or because I lack that, or it's because of where I was born or who my family is, that I'm not a good person. So I don't, all I need to do is sweep the streets because that's all I am worth. They have these thoughts, these low self-esteem and negative thoughts, and it's a lot of work for them to try to overcome that. I see many, many people who are trained to try to overcome that, and it's really, really hard. But that's the biggest job we have in managing conflict, is work with our inner voice. Do affirmations, no denigration. Affirmation is, when I was a dean and I ran meetings in the university, and of course I had other roles too where I had to run meetings, lots of meetings, nobody was allowed to put themselves down or anybody else. And my discipline was, if you self-negated, oh, I'm so stupid, I forgot my laptop or whatever, you had to sit there in front of us and give yourself 10 affirmations. You might want to do this. I did this even with young children. One put down requires 10 affirmations, and I made them write it. So sometimes they needed 3 or 4 days to think of 10 good things about themselves. And sometimes they needed my help because they didn't know anything that was good about themselves. They had such a negative internal voice. So, and I would send them to other people around them and say, well, get some help in writing about, I am good at this. I am wonderful about that. 10 affirmations for each put down. But in meetings, I made them say it right there before we would move on. What are 10 good things about yourself? Because you just did a self-denigration and negative. Okay, so these are categories. So any questions? Go ahead. Yes, I do. I want the questions. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Also extends to interpersonal and also
Exactly.
so how does one categorize such kind of conflicts? Because it's not just one.
Exactly. Thank you. So the question, I don't know if you could hear it in the back, especially the people who just came in back there. But the question is about one particular conflict nearby, and which has become violent. And in that conflict, the violence has been very, very direct, very, very bloody, and ongoing. So the question was, what categories of conflict here does that evidence? Okay, all of them. All of them. How could any of these categories be skipped? First of all, let's start at the top. It's structural. The structural situation is that not everybody's needs were met equally, and one group became more and more desperate to have their needs met, and then did an act, a provocation, provoked to get attention, is my understanding, through that provocation. I think set fire to a cultural symbol or something like that. That was the catalyst, the start, to then physical violence that continued. Okay, but the structural situation is what set this up. Needs were not met equally, and even though there were requests to have those needs met, didn't happen. So people became more and more desperate, and a small group within the group that wanted their needs met resorted to violence, damaging property that then denigrated into physical direct violence. So yes, it was structural. Was it cultural? Yes, because the people who are involved in this conflict have different cultural identities. That's so often the case. So now here we get into interpersonal. Okay, it must be you and this group, and so you are my enemy because you're that identity and I'm this identity, so I need to hurt you before you hurt me, or some kind of rationale. And it's not about our whole situation and the government's role or whoever else is responsible for helping us meet our needs. No, it's not about that. It's again, you against me. Not at all. Please help people in your students to understand that it's not about us against each other. It's about the whole situation that needs to be addressed and changed in some way so everybody's needs can be met. And when there's not equity, people get resentful. Oh, this group got it, but not that group, right? And there are all these justifications for why one group more than the other, and that's cultural. That's an identity issue again. For whatever the reasons somebody justifies that. Maybe it's a lack of resources. Maybe there's just not enough resources of what, I think this one was sharing a forest. I think that was the resource in this conflict, but whatever. If there are not enough resources, Johan Galtung says you have to be creative. And you know, he always says creativity is the best conflict resolution. Creativity. And when he goes in to help resolve violent conflicts, particularly between whole cultures and whole countries, he brings in people who are not related to either, because they're the best ones to step back and say, oh, what about this kind of thing? And what about that possibility? They get really creative thinking, and they come in and they work with the negotiators, mediators. And Johan says, you can't just give this group but not that group. You keep working on this until they both get their needs met. And it may take a long time. But quite often it doesn't if you have professionals. And you can get trained in this now. You can go and get trained in conflict work and get whole graduate degrees in it. You can run world organizations or just work in your community and start organizations and do the work personally. But okay, and so then interpersonal people start attacking each other because they see each other as the enemy, and they justify it because somebody started the violence, and so now I need to retaliate because somebody got hurt, and of course retaliation. And then that starts a whole trend like dominoes. One gets hit and it just keeps going. And it doesn't just keep going in that generation. The children who are watching are learning this. This is the curriculum. They learn, oh, when there's stress between groups, we need to get violent. So now the parents have a whole lot of work to do, and so do the teachers, and this is peace education. Help them understand that they don't need to attack each other, especially, as I said yesterday, when it's generations back and they're still doing it. No, violence begets violence. We know that. So if they're watching violence, this is what they're learning is a conflict resolution strategy. It doesn't solve anything. This particular conflict we're talking about here has not been solved. And the children are seeing that. And as long as it's not being solved and not being addressed, in their minds, this is the situation. This is how we respond. We respond with violence, and we respond with retaliation. I've been very honored to work in areas of the world where there's been this type of situation and where the victims, the surviving victims, and it's going on right now, I can say, in Palestine, Israel, the surviving victims are going to the enemy's side and trying to work with them to say, look, I forgive you, and this is not about us. This is not about us. Now let's get together and solve this problem. Let's do it. I'm always so amazed when I see that going on. And so happy about it. And that interpersonal, of course, I feel like I'm really, really not capable of dealing with this situation because I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm mad. I have all these negative emotions. I'm nervous. I can't focus in school. I can't eat and digest. I can't sleep. My health is going down. So now I'm becoming more desperate because of intrapersonal conflict. So the teachers in areas of direct violence, when they're lucky or blessed, however you might call that, get training from the psychotherapists. The psychotherapists come in and try to help them understand how do you help children who have experienced this get their self-concept back, find some internal peace. It's a lot of work. In this book, we have some examples how that's done through the arts-based interaction with survivors and victims. Okay, I guess I better move on or we're going to be on this slide all day. Thank you for the question. Yes, please do ask questions, and I love the opportunity to share examples, and I hope you will too. Okay, so structural conflict, I'm just laying these out. Now notice I put structural and cultural together. That's often done in analyses, because cultural is one of the roots of structural conflict. So they're highly related, but see cultural as one of the causes of structural, although it can also be the other way around. The structural situation makes people see each other as the enemy, as the case we just heard about. They're seeing each other, these two different groups are seeing each other more and more as enemies because of the structural conflict of not having equal resources. So what are some characteristics of these? So we have oppression, and I'm sure you know what oppression means. Discrimination, blocked access to opportunities, unaddressed harm. We've been harmed and nobody's done anything about it. And injustice. Dispositions described as isms, all those different isms, those attitudes against particular groups or individuals, those are structural conflicts. So yesterday we talked about ableism. We didn't use that word, I don't think, but we talked about people who are differently abled as students, and do they get their needs met in education? So anything that can be ending in an ism is part of structural conflict. If there's an ism going on in the mind about the self or somebody else, that's a conflict, and it needs to be worked with. That self-work needs to happen. And then characteristics of interpersonal conflict. I've already talked about this a little bit, just to recap. So communication patterns that have social effects such as misunderstanding, strained, harmful, and ended relations. Lack of restoration in this conflict we were talking about earlier here nearby. what kind of restoration is going on, if any? Has anybody been brought in to help restore relations? To help those children who observe this? To help those teachers who are amongst this situation? Help the children help themselves? Teach in this kind of situation? Restoration is very, very important. And restoring relations, and of course, restoring self-concepts. And in areas of the world where children have been forced or recruited into armies and trained to attack each other, I've seen some wonderful restoration work going on. Not enough, but I've seen quite a bit going on, and I'm just so happy to see it. Quite often it's coming from donations in NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And then interpersonal conflict, I describe that as cognitive, perceptual, emotional, physical, and spiritual effects, including self-concept, self-esteem, and self-harm. So these are conflict effects. This could be longer, but that's as much room as I had on the PowerPoint slide. So you can make your list longer. Okay, so let's have some examples. So here's one, intrapersonal. Okay, gender identity. How do I think about myself as gender? And what should my gender be allowed to have and do? A lot of that's cultural, but some of it's structural. Some of it is, okay, you can do this because, like I was brought up to think, oh, I can do almost everything that I want. But since I'm a woman, I remember that my high school counselor, I went in and we were supposed to be advised to what kind of career would you want to go into. And I wanted to go to the university, even though I came from a poor family. And the counselor advised me, she says, you could become a flight attendant. That's a good career for you. You become a flight attendant, okay? As soon as you get out of high school, you go to the airlines and become a flight attendant. And I'm like, no, I don't think I'm going to be a flight attendant. I might become the pilot, but then nobody would take a woman to train pilots at that time, and I didn't have the money anyway. But, just those little things like that. How did I think about myself? I had thought about myself enough as a person who could get an education because my grandmother had told me that. And she didn't have one, and she said, you're going to be the first one who can get to the university and get an education. You're going to do it. So, being a flight attendant wasn't on the agenda. So I had that going on for myself. But if I didn't, I probably would have gone out there and said, yeah, I'll make a good flight attendant. I'll just go do that with my life. And nothing wrong with flight attendants. It's a really important job, and I so appreciate them. So gender. So interpersonal. What are some of the interpersonal? These are just a few. Sexual harassment, exploitation, and femicide. I'm going to give you an example of femicide in a little bit. But it means the targeting of females and killing them. So interpersonal conflict. These are some of the effects of gender identity. And I'm sure you could mention many more. Structural, what are characteristics of structural conflict related to gender? Well, non and underrepresentation in response to gender-based violence. When women who are abused try to go to the police department in most areas of the world to get any help, they don't. They're sent right back or put out on the street. They don't get any, it's your family problem. Or they're lucky enough, there's a shelter they can go to for the night, but what the shelter does? It sends them right back. I had one in my neighborhood. The woman sent right back to the same household where she's beaten again the next day, and she has no other place to go. The police don't do anything. Quite often, they don't even take a report. And this is in USA. In many areas of the world, they're of course, beliefs, cultural. Do we believe that women should even be listened to or helped? Or is that just, part of that culture's way of dealing with their conflict in family? They need to beat the little girls or women. Cultural misogyny, the belief that women deserve less and can be joked about and made fun of. and mistreated. Cultural expectations for submissiveness, that, you know, in a relationship, that the woman should submit to the male's power. You see this all the time I do anyway, in all kinds of organizations, as well as the media. Okay, so gender is an example. And then we have disability. Can you all read this up here? In the back, can you read this? Put your thumb up if you can read it. Oh, you can read it. Okay. Oh, but I don't know if they can read it. So I guess I'll keep going. I was going to say you can read it and work with this, but I guess I better, because I don't know if it can, no, they can't read it on camera. Okay, so another example is disability, or being differently abled. Interpersonal, how do you think about yourself because you're differently abled? One challenge I have physically is I have a hearing problem. So when there are multiple sounds going on, I can't separate one person's voice. I have learned to read the lips and the mouth of the person. I can't separate. So it's always a challenge for me when I'm working in a room with people, because if someone's talking to me and somebody else is making any sound next to me, I can't separate the two, and I can't understand. So I have to get right next to the person who's talking to me and look at their face and try to understand that way, because my head doesn't separate sounds. But people don't see that, so I don't get mistreated, because they don't know until they realize that I'm not really understanding what they're saying, because there's all this noise around me. Interpersonal expression of lower expectations is structural opportunity limitations for people who are disabled, non-accommodations, particularly in public places or even in schools. Structural, I said that, and cultural exclusion in social events. I was reading a research paper the other day, research about human rights and groups of people in, I won't name the country, but the research found, you know, how many of these people, even though they had accommodations in school and in the university, and they could get jobs, they were not invited to many, many social functions. Highly educated people. They're in the university with jobs, but they're not invited to as many functions. This is just, you know, survey and observational research. Yeah, it was amazing, amazing. So think about that when things are planned. Okay, and then the last example I have here is minority identity. Minority for whatever reason, ethnic, race, gender, ableism. Interpersonal, you're thinking of yourself as a minority, so you think, well, you know, this society doesn't value me because I'm not the dominant population, so because I'm not valued as much, I'm not worth as much, I'm not present as much in the curriculum, if at all. And so I have this identity that, you know, okay, this is how much I can expect in life. I have lower expectations because of that identity. And of course, I don't really have any reason to change the structure in society, because why would I? We're not as valuable. Why should we get together and change the structure of society? So that affects the internal thinking and motivation. Interpersonal disregard for people who have minority identity. Oh, they don't have as much power, so I don't need to think about how they feel and how they could participate here. Structural lower success in biased and underfunded education. I talked about that a little earlier. Lower success, like the low reading group, those not represented in the curriculum, those whose languages are excluded. Well, you know, in the USA, most of our instruction is in English. And we have people come from all over the world in all these languages. But if the teacher says, no, we don't use that word, it has to be English. Well, they lose so many concepts and so many ideas, because there's so many concepts in other languages that are not expressed in English. So what are you doing? You're narrowing the curriculum? You can't teach and you can't learn that other word? Well, and that's from that culture anyway, and they're not, they're not the dominant culture here, so why should we even bother to learn it? I don't. So, and then lastly, cultural underrepresentation in the socioeconomic system. Less representation in the job market, lower level jobs. I was reading this week some research about indigenous females having the lowest pay rates around the world. In the countries from which the data was collected, they were making 50 cents on the dollar of any male on average wherever they worked. Same job, if they could get the same job. 50 cents on the dollar, half, get paid half, because they're indigenous. So, another culture. Okay. So conflict resolution versus conflict transformation. Johan Galtung helped us call these out, separate these. And so conflict resolution is putting out the immediate fire. Something is caught on fire and like, oh God, it's dangerous. We need to address it right away. So we go get some water or something and we put the fire out. That's taking care of the immediate problem. It's a way to resolve the conflict right now. Examples. Let's see. In my dissertation research in the last century, I went around a school district and I looked at the new intervention of conflict mediation training across all the schools in the district, the rich school on the hill with the wealthy families, and down lower elevation, this is a mountain river area like this, the poor school. I mean, the school had a lot less resources. Same school district, but those are poor kids, so they don't need as much resources. And I went around for a year and I just watched in all these schools, because this district was insightful and said, we need training to help our students resolve their conflicts and have peace. So we are going to train every teacher, every principal. We're going to train all of them in the school. They spent the money to train everybody on how to have students be mediators and address their conflicts. And so I went in and I watched those students, I watched the teachers, I interviewed the principals, so I collected all this data. And what did I see? I saw the children, meeting with each other, and they'd have two disputants, 3 at the most, come in with 2 mediators and a parent supervisor, who's somebody who was free to sit in the corner and just, be there, not necessarily a trained person. Watch this. They had no role to say anything or interact. And the mediators would, help the dispute and say, what is your problem? What is your problem? And then, okay, you hear each other now, you both are feeling this, and of course it's how do you feel and what do you need and all that. To make the story short, I saw so many structural problems get ignored. And so many students of minority identity say, okay, thank you, and go out, and nothing changed. It's like, oh, they're calling me racist names in school, and I feel really insulted, and I don't like that. And so the mediators would, oh, okay, you offender, are you going to stop doing that? Oh, yeah, I'm going to stop. Okay, thank you, bye. That didn't stop the problem, right? That's conflict resolution. So, and I don't mean to denigrate conflict resolution in schools, but that was just not deep enough. And then when I talked to the principals at these schools, they'd say, yes, it's working so well because I don't have the problem coming to my office. And I don't have mad parents coming to my office because, see, they have their own intervention. I don't have all that paperwork to do, and I don't have to, I forgot the word, take them out of school suspend them. I don't have to take them out of school for a day or two because they're offensive, and they're breaking rules. So I don't have to do all that. Isn't that great? It's working for them. You know who got killed? The child on the hill in the rich school got killed by another child in the school. The problem was not addressed, and they were in such shock at that school district. Like, how could that happen? We're a great school. We have all the resources. We have this program. How could this happen? Well, they weren't looking very deeply. No, They need to know what's going on. They need to look at the structural situation. All right, so conflict resolution is when you're addressing the problem immediately. And this is what a lot of teachers do, and this is what they have the time for, is to say, okay, you know, we've got this conflict in the class and we need to address it. So the immediate solution is this. And yes, get some ideas from the students and have them think of how maybe they can help their solve the problem. That's conflict resolution, just a real quick overview. Conflict transformation is what Johan brought in. And this involves finding the root cause of the problem. What is growing this conflict? What's underneath all of this? And that's usually something structural, not always, but usually. And working to change that situation. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of work. But it's so worth it. You want to get rid of violence? Do the work. So conflict transformation is changing relationships, changing interactions, changing perceptions and viewpoints that are causing interpersonal violence and harm, intrapersonal harm. So those students who were said, oh, you know, okay, they're not going to do this anymore and I'll just walk away and trust that, you know. In their minds, you know, I'm less of a person and that's why they can get away with this because I have this minority identity and that's just, you know, that's just what we have to put up with. So those kids over there said they're going to stop. So that's nice, that's good. But this is how I feel about it. No. I need to change that. So conflict transformation would work with those students and get them to work with each other to think about, what's this name-calling situation? And what does that mean? And why do I feel like I can name-call? And why would I want to name-call? And what is that doing for me? And besides, what is it doing for the other? You know, how do I feel about myself that I have to be a bully? Because we know most bullies have low self-esteem, and that's why they bother other people. And they're often bothered and abused, and that's why they do it. They need some power and relief for their pain. So we're going to do this today. We're going to